On All Saints' Day, a city of 275,000 people had 9 minutes to live, and nobody knew it yet. November 1st, 1755. Lisbon. I've read the survivor accounts myself. They're precise about the time because the churches were full. It was a holy day. 6 in the morning, maybe a bit before. The city was waking. Bakers were stoking their ovens. Servants were drawing water. Merchants were opening shutters on the Beekse, the commercial quarter down by the Tagus River. None of them understood what was about to happen. That's the thing about disasters, the people living through them are always the last to know. They're inside it. They can't see the shape of it yet. A tremor came first. Small, unsettling but not catastrophic. People felt it. Some looked up from their work. Some crossed themselves. Then the main shock hit. 45 seconds of it. The earth didn't just move, it rolled in waves. Witnesses said it felt like the ground was breathing. Buildings that had stood for centuries folded like paper. The patriarchal church collapsed inward. 5,000 people were inside. The king's palace shattered. Fire broke out almost immediately, dozens of fires, hundreds. The wooden city burned. By 9 o'clock that morning, the city was unrecognizable. 60,000 people dead. Some estimates ran higher. The harbor itself had changed. The earthquake triggered a tsunami. The Tagus surged inland, swallowed boats, pulled people into the current. Survivors wandered through smoke and dust looking for water, for family, for some explanation that made sense. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is where philosophy comes in. Because Lisbon wasn't some remote corner of Europe. It was a major city, educated people, connected people. The news traveled fast. Letters arrived in Paris, London, Amsterdam within weeks. And the questions people asked weren't just how do we rebuild, they were deeper, harder. Why would God allow this? You have to understand the intellectual climate. This was the height of the Enlightenment. Reason was supposed to be ascending. God was being rationalized away, or at least domesticated into a cosmic watchmaker. Science was explaining the world. And then, suddenly, nature showed its teeth. A city full of innocent people, many of them in church praying, was erased. Voltaire was in France when the news came. He was already a skeptic, already questioning religious orthodoxy. But Lisbon crystallized something for him. He wrote a long poem about it, bitter, accusatory. He asked, if God is all-powerful and all-good, how does evil exist? How does innocent suffering happen? It's not a new question. But Lisbon made it urgent. It made it real. The traditional answer had been, it's God's will. We can't understand it. We have to have faith. But faith is hard to maintain when you're pulling corpses out of the rubble. Voltaire and others pushed back. They said, if this is God's plan, then either God is not all-powerful, or not all-good, or perhaps doesn't exist at all. The earthquake became a philosophical weapon. Meanwhile, the theologians fought back. They had to. Their entire worldview was at stake. Some argued that moral evil, human sin, caused natural evil as punishment. Others said suffering tests faith, refines the soul. Still others claimed we simply can't comprehend God's purposes. These weren't frivolous arguments. They were desperate attempts to hold the framework together, but something had shifted. You can feel it in the writings that followed. The old certainties, that providence orders all things for good, that the universe is fundamentally rational and benevolent, those certainties cracked. Not for everyone, but for enough people in enough influential places to matter. The Enlightenment had believed in human reason and progress. Lisbon suggested that nature doesn't care about either. This is where it connects to us. We live in our own age of anxiety. We're confronted constantly with suffering we can't fully explain or control. A pandemic, a climate crisis, injustice that persists despite our best efforts. The Enlightenment dream, that reason and progress will eventually solve everything, that dream looks fragile now. It looked fragile in 1755 too. The Stoics had an answer for this. They'd been dead for centuries, but their framework held. Epictetus, a slave in Rome, taught that some things are in our control, our judgments, our efforts, our character, and some things aren't. An earthquake isn't in your control, but how you respond to it is. Your meaning-making is your own. Lisbon didn't resolve the theological crisis. It didn't settle the question of suffering. But it did something maybe more important. It forced Europeans to admit that the universe might not be built for our comfort. That was a mature realization, and it opened the door to a different kind of resilience. Not faith that everything happens for a reason, but determination to create meaning despite the chaos. Lisbon was rebuilt. It took decades. The Marquês de Pombal, the chief minister, imposed a rational grid on the city. Wide streets to prevent future fires from spreading. Stronger buildings. It was Enlightenment thinking applied to urban planning. Not abandoning reason, but using it more carefully, more humbly. Acknowledging that nature has limits we can't overcome, but that we can prepare, adapt, endure. That's the real legacy here. Not that faith died in Lisbon, though some lost it. Not that reason triumphed, though it was tested. But that people learned to live with uncertainty, to rebuild despite it, to ask harder questions about meaning and suffering without needing a neat answer. That's harder than either blind faith or pure skepticism. When you're overwhelmed by what you can't control, and honestly, who isn't these days, that's the lesson. You can't control the earthquake. You can't control whether suffering finds you. But you can control whether you rebuild, whether you ask better questions, whether you build a life and a society that's more resilient, more honest, more humane. Lisbon didn't give Europe an answer to suffering, but it gave them something harder and more useful, permission to stop pretending the universe is kind and to get to work building something better anyway. That's not faith. That's not naive optimism. That's wisdom. Subscribe for weekly essays on how ancient philosophy speaks to modern crises, because the answers we need are often older than we think.